Hello, this is Jennifer. I'm so glad you're here. I first wanted to apologize for not having a regular video up recently. I'm just trying to rest and recover from my shoulder surgery. I'm able to create, but only in little spurts at a time. And I really like stamping and ink blending are tough. But I was able to create a video today. It took me several days to do it, but I wanted to share with you some creative uses of vellum. The best part is if you have vellum and any stamps or stencils, you can try these techniques. It's really a great way to stretch your supplies and get really cool looks. All right, let's get started with this card here. I wanted to show you the completed card first so you can see the direction we're headed. Now this is actually a vellum card base, so you can see through it. I'll be doing stenciling on the front, and so I have tips for how to apply ink onto vellum. I'm using a layering stencil set, but you could really use any stencil you want on the front of this vellum card. I thought it would be fun to use this new layering stencil set from Gina K Designs called Christmas Flowers Stencils. The nice thing about this is it creates really bold flowers and leaves, which I think will really stand out nicely on that vellum. Now, as far as the vellum that you can use, try whatever you have. I like to use a heavier weight vellum when I am creating a card base. This is Simon Says Stamp 40-pound vellum, and there are many great options out there. I want to turn this into 2 top folding note cards, so I'm folding it in half. Normally I would use a scoreboard to score first, but my scoreboard's upstairs and I'm feeling a little lazy, so I just folded it in half. Then I will take my trimmer and cut that in half. So now we have 2 4¼ by 5½ inch top folding vellum note cards. And I'll use one for this card and save the other for later. Now we're going to do stenciling directly onto the front of this vellum note card. I have my Waffle flower grip mat on my glasswork surface, and I'll place my vellum card onto it. And then I'm placing one of the layering stencils on top of that. That grip mat will hold it all in place as we do our inking. Now this is actually the 3rd stencil in the layering set, but this just shows you that you don't have to go in order. I'm actually starting with the 3rd here, and I'll work my way backwards. I just wanted to make sure that these leaves, which are like the outmost part of the design, really touch the edge of that note card and kind of was centered on it a bit so that I have as much flower and leaf as possible on the front of the card. Now up there I have a Simon Says Stamp placement guide. It's just a piece that I'm using to mask off that top left corner of my note card. You can use scrap paper for that also. Now I'm using Gina K Design inks today. She has great green and red inks, and I'm going for a holiday card here, so I chose to use them. I am starting out with the Gina K Lucky Clover, and then I will add some fresh asparagus and some Christmas pine. To apply this ink, I am using a Gina K Designs large sponge dauber. So these are like the smaller sponge daubers that have been popular in crafting for many years, but you can use any kind of foam or sponge inking tool to apply the ink. Notice that I'm dabbing the ink on. I'm kind of pouncing it on very firmly and twisting just a little bit. I don't recommend using a brush here unless you want a light application of ink. If you go and just kind of blend onto the vellum doesn't really want to hold the color much. So it'll kind of wipe away a bit. But if you dab it on or pounce it on, as I'm doing here, you can get a lot of ink onto that vellum. It'll be very wet, don't worry, we'll heat set it in a moment. But by using a foam applicator or a sponge dauber like this, you can really put a lot of ink down. So I'll talk more about other tools you can use here, but so far I've put down those 3 shades of green. You could do 1 shade if you want to, but I have the 3 colors, so I thought I'd combine them to get that beautiful shaded look to those leaves. Now this is very wet on the vellum, so I want to carefully heat set this. I'm just putting my heat gun on it and moving it around, not too close to the vellum, because we don't want to cause any warping on the vellum. If you get a high quality vellum, you shouldn't have any problems with warping, and just keep that heat gun moving until you see the shine go away from the ink, which means it's absorbed and dried. Now it's time for the next stencil, and I wanted to make sure I lined it up just right. So I'm putting the first stencil back down, the one we've already done with the leaves, lined it up with the inking we've done. And I'm taking that placement guide up there and I'm lining it up along that top edge, and so the top right corners meet. So you see that top right corner of the stencil and that right corner of my placement guide. That way I know what orientation to put my next stencil down. So I can peel that one off and put this next one in place, making sure those two corners touch there up on the right. So you can see the top right corner of the stencil matches up with that right corner of that white placement guide. And now I know it'll line up. Now you could have eyeballed it, but this way I can be sure that it'll all line up as it was intended. Now I can add a red ink over this. This is Lipstick Red, and then you'll see me add some Red Hot, both from Gina K Designs. Now, as far as inking tools, you can also use a Tim Holtz ink blending tool, that has that domed foam on it. That would be great for this too. If you only have blending brushes, you can definitely use those. I just recommend pouncing very firmly as opposed to going in a brushing motion. All right, so now I put the lipstick red down. You can see it's very shiny there. I will carefully heat set that with my heat gun so that it kind of absorbs and dries. It loses that shine, and I can be sure I won't smear it. Okay, so now you can see it's all very smooth there. I'll place that back down onto my grip mat. And now it's time for the second layer of the flowers. Now I don't need any help lining this up because I can just lay the stencil down and line up these flower details on the flowers I've already done. These line up perfectly and they just add a bit of layering. Now over this stencil, I'm doing the darker Red Hot ink. Now as far as inks that you can do for this, I recommend dye inks. You could also use Tim Holtz distress inks, but dye inks will dry into the vellum with the help of a heat gun. Pigment inks really have a hard time drying on vellum, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. But grab any of those dye inks you may have and give them a try. Okay, so I did that darker red additional layer onto those flower petals. I'm heat setting that. And now it's time for the flower centers and also the little dots that kind of go around the flower for decoration. This time I'm using a smaller sponge dauber, the one that many crafters have had in their stash for a long time. I'm applying a dark brown to the center of the flowers and then honey mustard to the dots around the flowers. Another thing I could have done here is to use a Copic marker or some sort of alcohol marker to color in those dots of the stencil, just filling in the little dots. Those markers, alcohol markers, will really add a nice amount of color to vellum also. But keep in mind, you want to reach for a darker or more vibrant color than you want on your final project because the color kind of pulls back on the vellum. It softens a bit. So go darker than you want your final project to be. Okay, so we've got the yellow and brown down there, and we can heat set that, and now we have the front of our vellum note card. And I love that bold color. Shows you that you can do any type of stenciling on the front of a vellum note card. Okay, it's time to do the other elements for the card. I'm going to first create that gold frame that will be on the front of the vellum card. To create this, I have a little trick to show you. I'm using the Gina K Master Layouts 5 die set. I love her Master Layout die sets because they're so versatile. You'll see me use another later. From this set, I'm using that rectangle that has faux stitching on the inside edge. I'm going to show you how to create a frame out of a single rectangle die. All right, so I used that die to cut from white cardstock. You can see that faux stitching there on the edge. I'm going to hold that up against the corner of some gold matte cardstock. Now you'll see I'm leaving some of that gold peeking out on the left and the bottom edge, and then I will cut along the right edge, leaving the same amount peeking out there. Then I'll rotate and do it for the other edge. So basically, I am cutting this gold cardstock to be slightly bigger than that white rectangle. So it's a nice gold mat around it. But I didn't want to measure, so I just eyeball it that way. Okay, so I'll set that white die cut aside, and I'm just using that gold rectangle that we just cut. I'll take the die and place it right in the center. You'll see that gold trim around the edge. I'll lay it there, run it through my die cut machine, and this will result in a nice gold frame and also a gold rectangle die cut that I can save for later. I'm just using the frame today. So if you have any square or rectangle dies, you can easily create a frame from it doing that trick. I also created a white frame in the same way that I could glue behind the gold one just so it has a tad bit of dimension. Here's the thing, you could definitely just put one layer, just the gold frame down on there. It just depends on if you like that dimension or not. I'm always a big fan of the dimension. All right, so I'm going to set this aside. I'm not going to add it to my card just yet. Now it's time to create a mini card for the inside of our vellum card because we want a hidden place to write our personal message. So I have a top folding note card here. I have lots of those prepared. And I also have that white rectangle die cut that we just created a moment ago. I'm gluing this die cut up into the top left corner of that note card, and I'll trim off the excess of that note card. So basically, I'm creating a mini folded note card, and it has that faux stitching die cut on the front. Now, I could have measured the size to create that little card, but this was much easier to glue the die cut down and trim off the excess. So now we have a mini card for inside of the vellum. And the best part is, because I used the same die to create the frame and that mini note card, the two sizes line up nicely. So you can see how there will be a frame on the front and the card on the inside. The next element we need is the sentiment for the front, and I thought I'd start with the joy letters. I'm actually using a large background die from Gina K Design that says peace, love, and joy, but I'm only using the word joy. You can see the negative space die cut there. I'm cutting the word joy off. I'll use that as a template in a moment. But I also cut joy 3 times from white cardstock and once from gold matte cardstock, and I'm gluing those together for stacked dimension. Now again, that is totally optional. You could glue the gold letters directly onto the vellum, but I love that added bit of dimension, and the easiest way to do so is to stack a few die cuts behind the one you want on top. So now we have pretty much all of our elements ready, but I thought I would add some stamping to that white mini note card that's on the inside since it'll show through the vellum on the front. I have my MISTI stamping tool and a sticky mat, and also a background stamp. I'm taking my little mini note card, lining it up straight on that background stamp. Then I'll close my MISTI upside down. The sticky mat will grab a hold of that mini note card and hold it in place as we stamp. This is a Jingle All the Way stamp from Hero Arts. It just gives a nice subtle script look. I'm stamping it with Gina K Barely There ink, which is a light beige color, but I realized my stamp wasn't clean. It still had some blue ink on it, just a little bit. So this results in a stamped image that's kind of like a light green, but I thought it worked out just fine. I wanted something subtle there, and look, it shows through that vellum also. So you could do stenciling, stamping, whatever you want on that little mini note card and it'll show through. Okay, now it's time to glue everything together. I'm going to open up my card here and I will add our little mini note card into this open flap of the vellum. Now this will give us a place for a hidden message, but it'll also give more support to our vellum card, so it'll really stand up nicely. I'll be putting a lot of layers on the front, so to have this extra strength on the back is very helpful. If you don't plan to put much on the front, you definitely could skip something on the inside, but again, you really need a place for your personal message to be hidden. Now I've flipped the card over and I have another white rectangle die cut with that faux stitching, and I'm gluing that onto the back of the card. This will hide our adhesive, but also give us a place to write hand stamped by Jennifer. Okay, so now you could stamp a greeting there, whatever you want to do. I'm going to go back to the front of the card and finish that off. So I'm putting adhesive on the back of that layered gold frame that we created earlier, and I will line that up on the front of our vellum card so that it lines up around that white note card that's on the inside that we can see. So I'll just place it right there. I've got something heavy on there just holding it down. I'm placing that right around, and it'll be the perfect frame for that note card that's on the inside since we use the same die to create both. Now it's time to add our joy letters. I want to get the spacing just right and have them in a straight line, so I'm using this negative space that I cut off of the background die cut. And I'm just placing the word joy there in the center and using a little bit of temporary tape to hold it there. I will glue each of the joy letters into that opening. It's really easy to do. They pop in like a little puzzle piece. And then once I have all 3 of the letters placed, I can carefully remove that negative space. And I'm left with those joy letters attached to the front of our card, spaced out nicely and in a straight line. That's a really helpful trick with any word dies with individual letters like this. The only things left to add are little sentiments on the front and inside and some gold gemstones. For the sentiments, I'm using the new Gina K Designs Graphic Tree stamp set. I believe this stamp set is free for limited time for orders of $75 or more, and there is a coordinating die set available. I stamped Merry Christmas and Wishing You Joy with black ink on white cardstock and used the coordinating dies to cut them out. I'm gluing Merry Christmas right on top of the word joy on the front of our card. The Wishing You Joy will get glued on the inside, and I have a trick to show you how to line it up so you don't see through it. So I'm putting glue on the back of that sentiment that says Wishing You Joy, and I'm laying it upside down with the glue facing up right behind the Merry Christmas that's on the front of the card. I will then close the card closed onto it, so I'll close it down there, and that will grab the sentiment. Now I know it's positioned straight there and will be hidden behind the Merry Christmas sentiment, so you won't see that Wishing You Joy until you open the card up. So let's take a look at that completed card once again. I like how it is see-through around the edges. It's see-through when you open up that flap, but then in the inside is a little mini note card where you can write your personal message. And there is a place to write your hand stamped on the back. Here's a closer look at that coloring that we did on the vellum and the gold details we added. I also added that stamping to the inside on that little mini note card, and you can see that script stamping through the vellum, which I think it adds a fun touch. Making vellum note cards is one of my favorite techniques to do, and I have done many videos on it in the past. I will link in my description below and at the end of this video to a vellum playlist if you're looking for more creative ways to use vellum, including making vellum note cards. And I really think vellum note cards is a great way to make your card extra special with little effort. Okay, now let's create a vellum window card, and this time we're using stamps instead of stencils. Here's the completed card. You can see there are silver heat embossed outline flowers on that vellum window. But inside you have the same images colored in so that the color shows through that vellum. It makes for a fun surprise inside of the card and some muted color on the outside. Really fun to do, great with outline stamp images or layering stamp sets. The one I'm using today is a little bit of both. Now this is the new Gina K Designs Wishful Roses stamp set. It has 3 layering flowers and the outline image. There are coordinating dies available. By the way, look at these fun sentiments on here. I didn't use them today, but I really like that it has the wishing you and then other sub-sentiments to put under it like joy, peace, happy birthday, and so on. To create the windows on this card, I'm using dies from the Gina K Master Layouts 10 die set. I've used this many times in videos. You can see those 2 frame die cuts. One is slightly bigger than the other, and the smaller one has faux stitching on the inside edge. I will be using both of those dies today. Now let's get started with our note card and window. I have a white note card that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, top folding. And I also have a piece of plum cardstock that is slightly smaller. It is 4 by 5 1/4 inches. I'm placing the smaller of the 2 frame dies, the one with the faux stitching, right at the center. And I'm using my T-ruler just to make sure it's straight and as centered as I can be. I'm not really good at eyeballing the centering of things, so a T-ruler is very helpful. I've shared other ways to make sure things are lined up nicely, but in this case, the T-ruler seemed the best. And I'll run that through my die cut machine. I want to create the same die cut opening on the front of our note card. So I'm holding the negative space here at the center of our note card. I'll pop the die cut into the opening. This is a little trick for you. I'll pop the die cut into the opening, hold it there, remove that negative space. Now, without allowing that die cut to shift, I'll take the die and put it right on top of the die cut. It'll kind of pop right on there when you have it positioned just right. I'll press the tape down, open up the note card, and run that through my die cut machine. Now, it didn't cut all the way through because that extra purple die cut was there, so I'll just put the die back into the indentation that we've created, run it through again, and now we have an opening on the front of our note card that lines up with the opening on the front of the purple piece that'll be glued to the front of our card. See how it's lined up nicely there? That's just one of the many ways you can create a window on a card panel and on a note card to line up. Now it's time to do some stamping that will go inside of the window. To do this, I need 2 pieces. I need a vellum that's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches and a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, same size as our note card. I'm placing my note card into my MISTI stamping tool just so I can line up with that window. I want to make sure that my flowers are lined up so they'll show in this window opening. I'm using the 3 outline flower images and lining them up there. Now you'll notice my bottom 2 flowers overlap on the bottom, so I'm going to take the 3rd flower off and stamp it after I do the first 2 because they overlap there on the bottom. So I'll take that 3rd flower out there, close the door on my stamping tool to grab those 2 outline images, and I'll remove that note card. Again, I was just using that to line it up. Okay, I'll take that piece of vellum that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches and place that into my MISTI stamping tool. I'll use my anti-static powder tool so we get crisp heat embossing, and I'll stamp those 2 flower outlines with Versamark ink. Now, after I've stamped onto the vellum, I'll take the white piece of cardstock of the same size, put that into the MISTI stamping tool, and stamp the 2 flowers with Versamark ink onto the white also. Now, this will give us the flowers in the exact same spot on both that vellum piece and the white cardstock piece. By the way, there are a million ways you could do the technique I'm sharing today. This is just what made sense to me at the time. Now I'm adding silver embossing powder to the vellum images and to the white cardstock images. The nice thing is Versamark stays wet long enough that I could stamp them both, then add the powder to both at the same time. Now I will use my heat gun to heat emboss these. When you're heat embossing on vellum, make sure your heat gun is very hot before you start and keep that heat gun moving so you don't cause any warping. Heavier weight vellum is much less likely to warp, so I do recommend that. But try whatever vellum you have, just keep the heat moving and not too close. Okay, so now we have the silver outline images on both pieces, and look at this. They line up perfectly. Now we just need to go back and do the exact same thing, but for that 3rd flower. Remember, I had positioned them so that the bottom of these 2 bottom flowers overlap, so we couldn't do them at the same time. You could definitely have saved time if you just would have swung the stem of this one out a bit, but I really wanted them to cross over. So I put the white cardstock piece in here. I'll stamp with Versamark ink on it. Then I will put in the vellum piece and stamp with Versamark ink on it. Now this flower will be in the same spot on both of those pieces. I will add that silver embossing powder and heat set. If you find for some reason that you can't heat emboss on your vellum but want to try this technique, you could use a permanent ink such as StazOn ink and stamp onto the vellum with that. Okay, so now we have our 2 pieces with the same 3 images heat embossed on both in the same position so they line up very nicely. Now the white piece will be going on the inside of our card when we open it up, and I want some bold color on that. Thankfully, this is a layering stamp set, so I'm just using the layering images to color in the flowers. If you are more comfortable with coloring, you could definitely just use markers or watercolor here, whatever you want. I do recommend bold color so that it'll show through the vellum when the card is closed. I'm using Gina K Dye's medium orchid and dark orchid inks. And then for the leaves, I'll be using Jelly Bean. Now I'm stamping that on top of the silver embossing powder. So it'll stay wet on top of that silver embossing powder, but that's okay. You can either wipe the excess ink off of the embossing, or you can just reheat set it when you're done, which you'll see me do in a moment. While that pink ink kind of absorbs into the paper and dries a bit, I'll move on to the leaves. So I'm lining up the 3 leaf solid images, and I'll stamp that with Jelly Bean Green. Again, this stamp set had outline images and the solid layering to color them in. If you just have outline images, you can do regular coloring here. If you just have layering stamps, you could just do one of the layers on the vellum and the rest on the white piece underneath. Here I'm using a green marker just to color in the stems and add a bit of faux layering on those leaves. The last bit of stamping to do is the layer for each of those flowers. This is really easy to line up because of that outline image. You can really look through it and line it up nicely. And I will stamp this layer with that orchid color, but the darker shade. So this time I'll use the dark orchid. If you only have one color, you could just stamp this layer multiple times to make the ink appear darker. And look at how that just makes it pop. Once you're done with the stamping, I like to reheat set this. That will dry the ink on the embossing powder and also bring the shine back to the embossing powder that might have been dulled by the ink on top. And there we have our beautiful bold image to go on the inside of the card. Now that we have the basic pieces, let's start putting it together. I have my purple frame that will go on the front of our card, and I'm putting adhesive on the back of it. I will then lay that on top of our vellum piece where we have the silver outline images. Once I have it in place, I can trim off the excess of the vellum. Now at this point, I held this over my flowers and I thought, you know what? I want something on that purple. I wished I had stamped on that purple frame before I glued this together. Didn't want to try to take it apart, so I just thought I'd show you a trick on how to add this stamping now. So I'm taking that purple frame, putting it into my MISTI stamping tool, along with the Hero Arts script stamp. I like text and script stamps because they just add the look of detail and texture without something that's too distracting. Now I'll take that leftover die cut that we created our frame with, and I'll just put it right over our vellum piece so that I don't get any stamping on it. I'm using that dark orchid ink and stamping I'm using the medium orchid ink and stamping right on top of our purple frame. Now that purple die cut in the center that is really just masking off our vellum behind, I can save that piece for another card. Now I can add this frame with the vellum on the inside to the front of our note card. So I'm just putting adhesive on the back around the edge, and I'll place that onto the note card so that the windows line up. Now I did that trick earlier to line up those window openings, so I know the positioning will be just right. By the way, if you wanted to, you could turn this into a vellum shaker window by doing 2 layers of vellum and foam tape between. That would also be fun. Now remember I mentioned there were 2 frame dies. We've been using the smaller of the 2 with the faux stitching. This time I'm going to use the larger of the 2. And I'll use that larger one to cut out these flowers. And this die cut will go on our mini note card on the inside. Now the reason I chose to use this larger flower frame is because I wanted to make it easier to line up. I'm just kind of eyeballing it so that this cuts in a similar way to the window on the front of our card. You could leave this whole if you wanted to, but I thought using this larger frame die would be fun. Next, I created a mini note card to go on the inside. This is about 3.5 by 5 inches top folding, and I used the same color of cardstock that I used on the front. I'm gluing that right to the inside of the card, and then onto that, we'll be able to glue our floral die cut piece. I'm putting glue on the back of that die cut, and then I will hold it behind the window on the front, lining up those outline flower images, lining up that silver heat embossing. Once I have it lined up, I will close the card shut, and then that glue that's on the back of the die cut will grab onto that mini purple note card on the inside, and it'll be lined up. So when our card is closed, you see that muted color showing through the outline silver embossing. And then when it's open, you have the flowers alone. So this is just a fun way to create a vellum window card. We're in the home stretch on this one, just add a few details and a sentiment. I thought it'd be nice to have a silver frame around that window, so I'm using the 2 frame dies together and silver matte cardstock. I'll run that through my die cut machine. This will create that solid die cut, which I can save for later, and the frame for around it. To adhere it around that opening, I'm using Gina K Connect in a fine tip bottle. That little fine tip nozzle is great for putting that fine line of adhesive down. Okay, now it's time for sentiments to go on this. Now I decided to combine a die cut sentiment with a stamped sentiment. I'm using the Gina K Scripty Quartet dies. You can see the dies included in that set there on the right. I chose to use the word hello, and I've used these dies a lot in videos. Now for a stamped sentiment underneath it, I'm using the Gina K Designs You Give Me Butterflies stamp set, and there are coordinating dies available. However, I'm just stamping Thinking of You on a white cardstock strip. I added both of those towards the bottom center of that vellum window and added a few silver gemstones. So here we have our completed card. You can see how that color shows through the flowers, through that vellum. When you open it up, you have the mini card inside where you can write your personal message inside of that. You can also see here how the flowers line up when it is closed. We have that script stamping around that purple frame and our sentiments placed on top. So you can see through that vellum window with the silver outline and have the bold colors on the inside. So this is another fun way that you can use your vellum along with many of the different stamps you may have. And if you don't have a frame die like this, you could use circle dies, rectangle dies, any basic shape. Now, I did want to create a vellum card using this layering stencil set. I love this set. It's called the Heartfelt Snowflake Stencils, but I ran out of time in this video. I think this would be beautiful inked up like in blues and purples on a vellum note card, and then maybe put a circle at the center. So very similar to the first card that we did, but with the large snowflake instead. So just really look through your stash and see what different stencils or stamp sets you can use to create a vellum card. If you're interested in what I used, I do have that linked below in my YouTube description. At the end here, I will link to a couple other related videos, and one of those is my vellum playlist if you want more vellum ideas. I thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll be back as soon as I can with another video.